My name is Julia. I use she, her pronouns, and I live on Wabanaki land. A quick visual description is that I'm a Palestinian American white woman with short brown hair, clear glasses, a keffiyeh headband, and a blue shirt. My background is the Palestinian flag with the Centering Palestine logo on it. Zoom has this lovely glitch where sometimes it won't let you copy things out of the chat. So go ahead, open up that packet we've posted, and then you don't have to fight with Zoom if Zoom decides that it has that glitch. This event is organized by COVID Isn't Over community volunteers, including Palestinian, Jewish, and ally contributors. I'm going to briefly go over our community agreements, and then I'll give the news update. As some of you may know, we pause admittance during the news update because of content warnings. Once that content warning is lifted, we do let anyone in who's come late. That's totally okay. So if you ever come a few minutes late and get stuck in the waiting room, don't worry, we will let you in. Here is the brief version of our community agreements. You're welcome to look at that full version that's been posted in the chat. We are COVID cautious. We are organized by COVID cautious folks, and we ask attendees to be respectful of that intersection. What that means, practically speaking, for our sessions here is that we're not going to talk about organizing or protesting in ways that don't take really important accessibility measures like taking COVID precautions. We are a pro-Palestine space, of course. We support the liberation of Palestine and are anti-Zionist. We do not tolerate anti-Semitism or Islamophobia of any kind. We are anti-Zionist, and anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Zionism is a settler colonial nationalist movement, and geopolitical powers like the US and Israeli governments have worked really hard to make Zionism and Jewishness synonymous. This is inaccurate and only serves to further harm Jewish and Palestinian communities. We center marginalized voices, particularly right now Palestinians. We use content warnings when appropriate. In terms of chat etiquette, everyone does a great job every week, but we ask that comments stay focused on the task at hand, just to make sure that we're not detracting from any important action items. With that, I'm going to move into our news section. So we're going to pause admittance. If you would like to turn your sound off for this portion, you are welcome to. We will put in the chat when the content warning is lifted. That way you'll know to turn your sound back up. And I always like to say, if you have kids in earshot, I would definitely put headphones in. Our sessions in general are not geared for children, and the news topics are definitely not sort of safe for little ones to be listening to. So go ahead and take the moment to put on headphones if you need to. Okay, let's dive in. We've had some big headlines this week, so I wanted to be able to dive into what they mean practically. For our first update, today is day 172. And as of today, Al Jazeera reports that at least 32,798 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and the West Bank since October. The biggest headline, probably from the last couple days, is that the UN finally, after literally over 5 months, passed a ceasefire resolution. This resolution comes from the UN Security Council specifically, where the US abstained from the vote while everyone else on the council voted yes. Writer Mitchell Plitnick gives a good summary of how this ceasefire is better than nothing, but not overly actionable. That topic 2 link that was just posted has the full article. I'm just going to take a few quotes from it that I think are really helpful in understanding this is good, but not amazing. So I'll let his words do the explaining. He writes, in terms of what the resolution will actually do on the ground, there is little there. The resolution demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, which ends in a mere 2 weeks. While demand is welcome language, it calls for a ceasefire to be leading to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire, but this is just aspirational language with no binding effect. He continues that this is still an important step. Despite the weakness of the resolution, there is real value here. The biggest piece of this is the delinking of the ceasefire and the release of the Israeli hostages. This is a key issue that the US fought for, but the non-permanent members would not relent, and the US eventually backed down. Plitnick concludes that it's a measure of the damage Netanyahu has done to Israel's standing in the world that all 10 non-permanent members could come together on this resolution. The 10 members represent a diverse collection of interests and worldviews. Those states didn't just agree, they worked together closely to get this resolution passed and stood together against American obstructionism, then got the other 4 permanent members on board and put together enough compromises to get an American abstention. Basically, the win is pretty mid, but we'll take anything we can get. And the most important thing that I appreciate this writer pointing out is that America can't just bully anyone into doing what it wants. So it's very mixed reviews is what I'll say. This has been the biggest question I've gotten this week. What does it mean? And I keep sort of scratching my head and saying, unsure. I'm unsure. I do think it's mildly positive, and we'll take what we can get at this point. So thank you for letting me do the deeper dive. I know that was a big update we wanted to cover. Moving on to our next topic, just some updates from the situation in Gaza. It is pretty bad. Al Jazeera reports the entire Gazan population is now 100% severely food insecure. And Israel yet again invaded and killed dozens at Gaza's barely functioning Al-Shifa hospital. The IDF continues to claim that, oh, there were terrorists there, etc., so we can bomb whatever we like. I cannot tell you how frustrating that is when that is the oldest trick in the book that they've used, whether it's a school, a hospital, a neighborhood, that just apparently gives them carte blanche to be able to, kill and attack any areas they want to. So it's very discouraging to see the news coming out of Gaza. And just before I logged on, I can barely keep up with the news myself. Just before I logged on, despite the resolution, the ceasefire resolution being passed by the Security Council, there are reports that Rafah neighborhoods continue to be bombed. The next topic 4 that I wanted to mention is that you may have heard this, but if you haven't, this is a good thing to take note of. Instagram is unfortunately trying to suppress political content. If you click on that source 4 there, it gives you a nice little slide walkthrough of how to turn that setting off so that you continue to see political content on your feed. It's not that hard to turn it back off if you know what you're looking for, but they snuck it up on all of us. So make sure to take a look at that if you are a big Instagram user. Another great headline, this is exciting to finally have a little bit of good news. Another great headline we saw is that Canada has halted arms sales to Israel. This is an important step, although some activists do not feel this bill was as strong as they'd hoped. The quote from the article is that Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East called the motion watered down in a statement, but said that it represented a small step forward in ending Canadian complicity in Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. So between the Security Council's ceasefire call and Canada's halt to arms sales, it does really pave the way for other countries to follow suit, and I do find that encouraging. If you know me, then you know I've been complaining about the New York Times coverage of Gaza from pretty much the beginning. And one of our volunteers sent me this next link, topic 6, called The New York Times War Crimes. And they actually cover how basically the New York Times has helped to manufacture consent for war crimes in many places, but they actually have a whole page dedicated to Palestine coverage. And I really appreciate how they have taken the time and effort to consolidate all this resources and show the data of how the coverage is extremely biased against Palestinians. So I encourage you to check that out. A topic I'm going to touch on extremely briefly because I do not have the knowledge or time to go into too deeply, but I encourage you to read this post. And I'm sorry there was only an Instagram version of this, but I encourage you to read the post by Teaching While Muslim on Sean King. If you don't know, he's a social media creator that has raised a lot of awareness for many issues, but doesn't always do so without hurting marginalized people along the way. And it's quite a social media storm that I cannot get into right now, but definitely read Teaching While Muslim's posts because they have a lot of fair points and they're getting a lot of hate for it, even though I think their critiques are extremely valid. Just a few more topics before we get to our action section. In topic 8, I just put a couple, 2 posts that I thought really represent how, despite how slow it feels, there is a change in our political landscape. The first comes from Representative Katie Porter, who is talking about the Leahy Act. Basically, this act says that if you're a country that is committing human rights violations, as America, we should not be giving you lots of weapons, right? That's the short version. And so Representative Porter was bringing up basically why is Israel immune to this? We should be, applying this law that we would to any other country, right? So it's great to see Representative Porter talking about this when she has been criticized for not supporting Palestine to the extent that we would like. And that other Instagram post you may have seen going around as well, but it just kind of sums up the ways that Democrats are losing trust in voters right now, specifically in the US. So I do think that leading up to the 2024 election, Democrats are now more sincerely counting the cost of their, so-called unwavering support of Israel. So that means this is a great time to keep that pressure on our representatives, because we do see their unwavering support start to crumble a little bit as elections get nearer. Lastly, I wanted to touch on some international topics. Topic 9 is a great post to catch up on if you are unaware of this, but it has been a year since the US State Department basically created this ethnic cleansing determination for Tigray. Basically, there were a lot, this is a group of people that experienced ethnic cleansing and war crimes, and the US's declaration was supposed to help create international accountability for this. Unfortunately, there has not been a lot of international support for this, and the conditions there still remain dire with struggling healthcare systems, food insecurity. So I really encourage you, because it has been a year since that important decision, or determination, I should say. I would encourage you to catch up on that post if you haven't yet. In Sudan, there continues to be this, unfortunately, the same kind of chaos and brutality. According to the UN, 24 million children are exposed to brutality and rights violations in Sudan. And there's only been, unfortunately, more chaos this last week as Sudan announced it's unable to fill its oil exports. This is one of their most important exports for their economy. So this, only adds to instability. Just as in Palestine, a ceasefire is the most helpful thing that could happen right now, so that civilians can get the aid and care that they need. Similarly, in Congo, the M23 attacks are continuing to escalate, including some attacks on UN peacekeepers. There are still millions that remain internally displaced in the DRC, and as M23 and other rebel groups are continuing to wreak havoc. And I think one of the saddest things about this situation is that the international community is very much choosing to protect corporate interests above civilians and children that are really, the ones being harmed in this situation. So I encourage you to catch up on those news stories if you haven't yet. I'm going to list my content warning. Thank you for dealing with a longer news section. There was a lot that happened in the past week. Welcome. Thank you for waiting. We've just lifted our content warning from the news section. We are doing our action segment next. And so I'm going to hand the baton to Kevin, because we're going to do one action item together before we split up into groups.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kevin. I go by he or they pronouns. I am calling from Muskogeland. A quick visual description of me is I am white, Ashkenazi, and mixed, most likely mostly British Isles. I have glasses on and a dark brown beard and hair, and I'm wearing a polo shirt. For our action section tonight, there's going to be one action that we can all do together, and then there are some country-specific rooms. So given the news coming out of Canada, this week we have a Canada room, which is going to be focused on thanking if your MP supported the NDP motion, and also expressing concerns about the loopholes in the motion. And then there's an all other countries room. And so it's actions as applicable. Not all the actions are applicable to all the countries, but it's basically support for a ceasefire, advocating for UNRWA funding restoration. A number of countries have already restored UNRWA funding, and also asking to not arm Israel. And there's actually a separate action if you're calling from New Zealand, since New Zealand is more progressive than many other nations on this issue. They actually have a separate action for tonight. Okay, so in terms of our general action, we wanted to provide something that you could signal boost. So I'm going to pull up this Instagram reel that we can watch together. In the chat, there's a link to this reel, and also the letter that this reel links to. Feel free to sign the letter if it's applicable. The letter is written from cultural heritage workers and crafters. Not all of us fit that demographic. But yeah, I'll let the reel speak for itself.
A supporter of cultural heritage, listen up. Did you know that Palestinian embroidery, or tatriz, is not just a craft? It's an incredibly integral part of Palestinian cultural heritage. So much so that since 2021, Palestinian embroidery, or taltriz, has enjoyed protected status through its designation as a form of intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. And due to Israel's ongoing war on Gaza and its occupation in the occupied Palestinian territories, Palestinian embroidery has come under threat. Now, it's important to note that practitioners of Palestinian embroidery have committed to the use of DMC thread for over a century. Palestinian embroiderers often praise DMC's pearl cotton for its luminosity, its consistency, and its longevity, and DMC has essentially become part of the Palestinian embroidery story. In 2022, stitchers around the world witnessed DMC take an admirable and firm stance in support of Ukrainians against Russian aggression. We are now 5 months into a genocide of the Palestinian people, and DMC has yet to say a word. Why is that? So we've written a letter to DMC. It demands that DMC extend its solidarity to Palestinian artisans. As of recording this video, we are 51 signatures away from hitting 1,000 signatures. Join us now. Let DMC know that cultural heritage matters, no matter the culture. If you're an embroiderer or
So I think that video gives a far richer explanation and introduction than I can. And, you know, again, I know we've said this before in previous action sections. These are all optional. You know, if you want to bookmark information, you can come back to it later. That's totally fine. And, you know, this space is also here and available to you if you do want to take collective action together. So the reel is there. The letter is also available in the reel as well.
Awesome. So tonight's education segment is in honor of the fact that this is Women's History Month. I am keeping this short tonight so that we stay on time. I definitely recommend reading those links further if this is a topic that really interests you. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about white Western feminism. White Western feminism too often fails Black and brown women, and this is only exemplified by the lack of care we're seeing for Palestinian women today. Western feminists are so ready to criticize the Middle East and Islam especially, but they're currently remaining silent about this genocide against Palestinians. Writer Miriam Aldasari notes, she's written a couple of great articles I recommend you reading, but she notes that the West is often trying to, like, quote unquote, liberate Middle Eastern women without ever actually asking them what they want or what they need. Aldasari continues that feminists today are not only failing to care about Palestinian history, but are actively silencing voices that are standing up for Palestine today. So it's this kind of double standard that allows the New York Times to publish false sexual assault claims against Hamas, claims that were actually written by a former Israeli intelligence officer, while they continue to ignore the daily violence that Palestinian women face. I do want to mention that I am always on the side of survivors, of always believing survivors. So this is never to discount or discredit a survivor, but to say that that should be applied equally to Palestinian women as well, right? Next, I wanted to just briefly talk about women's rights issues in Palestine. So occupied Palestine, as with any country, has its own unique intersectional struggles. This includes that Palestinian women do face patriarchy and sexism. However, just as women in the West fight back and create change, so do Palestinian women. And Palestinian feminists are working for changes that center their own needs and solutions. They have workers' unions and grassroots organizing, and their impact is strong. It's just that the West rarely wants to look to their opinions or leadership. It's also important to look at the very particular circumstances that Palestinian women face. Not only are they living under siege, occupation, and/or heavy surveillance, but Western feminists are rarely taking into account differences in history, culture, and religion. I wanted to bring up this quote because I think it really exemplifies a balance that the West, especially Western feminists, struggle to hold. So feminist scholar Nada Elia writes that Palestine will not be free until Palestinian women and gender nonconforming individuals are free, not only of Zionist settler colonialism, but also of the restrictions imposed by militarized, violent masculinities within Palestinian society. So I encourage you to read more. Those articles linked are a bit academic-y, but they talk about Palestinian feminism and women's rights in Palestine. What I really appreciate about these pieces, as they're written by Arab and Palestinian women, is that they balance the criticisms without being Islamophobic and without encouraging anti-Arab hate. This is a hard line to walk, and I don't see Western feminists even trying to. So I really appreciate the balance that they strike here. Again, if that's something you want to dive deeper into. I did want to post this note. So this is Women's History Month, like I mentioned, and so that's why I wanted to take the time. We wanted to take the time to share. But I do want to mention that all of our struggles, I say this almost every week, all of our struggles are interconnected, and needing to kind of sort everything into perfect boxes, I think can actually hold us back sometimes. So I do want to mention that LGBTQIA plus Palestinians face many challenges, and they also build beautiful community as they do across the globe. Palestinian men continue to face dehumanization and villainization despite their tireless work to care for their families under genocide. So our focus on Palestinian women today is not at all to take away from these other important issues or representation, but just to remind us that no one is free until everyone is free. So I really wanted to take the time to say this isn't about exclusion. We're just taking this moment to look at this area here. This is our second content warning for tonight. This is unusual for us, but I did want to talk about a kind of serious topic. If you want to, again, as in the news section, turn off your volume, totally okay. We'll put in the chat when we're done. So I'm just going to wait a second. If you don't, if you need that moment to turn down your volume, please go ahead. All right, I'm gonna move forward. It's just gonna be 2 slides. So I did really want to mention it. I can't not mention the harm and abuse under occupation that Palestinian women face. So this is brutality and ethnic cleansing at the hands of the IDF, and it's been going on for decades. Let's Talk Palestine's recent post summarizes the violence, and I just wanted to give you the kind of the short version here. So since October 7th, Israel has continued to abduct and take many Palestinian women and girls, including journalists and humanitarian workers. Women in captivity are treated inhumanely. They're denied food, menstrual products. They're beaten and assaulted. They're not allowed to speak to their families or lawyers while in their so-called administrative detention. UN experts have for a long time been raising concerns about extrajudicial killing of Palestinian women. Sexual assault is rampant, and there are many reports of rape, and IDF soldiers post publicly and unashamedly about their actions. This is not new. I cannot stress this enough. This is not new. Gender-based violence has been a tool of colonial oppression by Israel from the beginning, and it's just one tactic in a long line of methods of dehumanization. This next slide I literally took from Let's Talk Palestine's post that's linked, but it said everything so well that I would just like to read it to you. They write, "The persecution of Palestinian women highlights the need for feminism that addresses women's issues from an anti-colonial and anti-racist approach. Fundamentally speaking, feminism cannot support racism, supremacy, and oppressive domination in any form," writes Miriam Barghouti. "We can't contextualize the oppression of Palestinian women without understanding how the racist ideology of Zionism is the reason for such oppression. Israeli control over Palestinians' lives extends to control over their bodies. As long as Israeli soldiers use sexual violence as a weapon of war, we can't continue to think of gender-based violence as detached from its political context. The struggle of Palestinian women is shared by women across the global south, from Sudan to the Congo." Okay, our content warning is lifted. I thank you for bearing witness to that very serious topic. I'll give us a second to turn our volumes back on. There we go. I wanted to talk briefly, we are going to stay on time tonight. I wanted to talk briefly about women leading resistance in Gaza. Our understanding, especially from the Western news media, is really biased. And I love this quote by Maria Holt. You should definitely read the full article. But she writes, "Outside observers tend to imagine the face of Gaza as resolutely male, the bearded Hamas militant, or the young man hurling stones across the border fence. But Palestinian women, both in Gaza and the West Bank, have a significant presence as activists, protesting against unjust occupation, but also the backbone of a fragmented and demoralized society." Definitely read that full article, but I thought that was a beautiful quote. I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and history, and this ties into that action we mentioned at the very beginning. So one of the many beautiful ways that Palestinian women preserve history and culture is through traditional cross-stitch to trees. These patterns and motifs capture stories about where families are from, about nature, farming culture, resistance, just so much. I've linked a short video if you want kind of like an introduction explainer to trees embroidery. And I tried so hard to find somewhere that was streaming this, but I couldn't. Keep an eye out for the documentary called Stitching Palestine. It's directed by Carol Mansour, and every once in a while, different Palestinian organizations will do like a Zoom virtual screening. It is such a beautiful documentary about 12 Palestinian women in diaspora and how they're preserving their history through this art form. So keep an eye out. If I hear about one, I will definitely post about it because it is such a good documentary. And if you are a crafter or a stitcher and you want to learn more respectfully about Tatriz, check out Tatriz and Tea. Her name is Wafa, and she is kind of the OG like online Tatrizer. Like all of us that have grown up with social media know her. So I definitely recommend checking her out. We're almost done. I wanted to put a brief PSA because you may have seen these beautiful illustrations going around Instagram and or other platforms too, actually. And they are of, traditional thobes. You can see the embroidery, but you can also see the different styles. I love this one. You can see the different styles of dress based on the region. However, as happens with the internet, Nada is the original creator, and I've linked her Etsy. So many people are stealing her work. Unfortunately, it is just a problem of the internet. But I did want to point out, even if you just go check her out on Etsy, that, teaches the algorithm to drive traffic to her Etsy versus, an Etsy that's stealing the work. So I just wanted to shout her out because she does this beautiful work that is so popular. And I feel so bad when artists are stolen from, especially when, this is, cultural heritage that she's trying to preserve. So I had to do my little PSA there. This last slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but it is just a list of resources if you want to spend more time. So folks you can follow, places you can learn about, articles you can share, documentaries to watch, just a whole kind of list of nice things to do on this topic. But it is 9, so we've done it, we've stayed on time. We will next week be talking about how to protest for Palestine in more COVID-safe ways, especially as spring and summer are hitting. And we're also going to be taking actions that focus on preventing further arms from going to Israel.